The Spanish Inquisition has a certain reputation. It is seen as a bastion of near-indiscriminate torture and corruption and of brutal repressions of Jews and Muslims. To put it bluntly, it's an institution with a bad reputation. But just how bad was the Spanish Inquisition really? Were they really as terrible as they were made out to be, or is this the result of historical disinformation? Now obviously, the Spanish Inquisition was a long-lived body that operated differently in different areas and was also reformed several times. The way it did things was subject to change depending on circumstances, and as such we're going to focus on the period during the reign of King Philip II just to narrow things down. And the reason why is that this is the period in which the Inquisition was said to be at its worst. Before continuing, there's something that does need to be said though. Most people expected the Spanish Inquisition because when a person was being prosecuted, they would give you roughly a month's notice. So the Spanish Inquisition was tasked with one thing: to rid Spain of any threats to the Catholic faith. The primary crime they were looking for was of course heresy, although they did investigate things like witchcraft. So at the time, the accusation of witchcraft and the practicing of magic was a fairly common one. Whilst many people at the time did believe in witchcraft, it's important to note that the Catholic Church and by extension the Spanish Inquisition were very sceptical. The majority of witchcraft cases ended with acquittal, and those who were found guilty of making false claims were often fined. For those who had unknowingly committed acts of heresy or claimed to be healers or some such, their punishment wasn't death but public penance. Although if you were found guilty of being a witch, you'd be tortured and killed. But what about the Inquisition's main focus? What about heretics? Well, the Inquisition had been founded to confirm the conversion of Moriscos and Conversos, who were former Muslims and Jews who had been commanded to convert or leave Spain in the late 15th century. These people were often harassed by the Inquisition, and in many cases they were expected to pay bribes in order to be left alone. So what if someone was caught with non-Catholic religious texts or were, God forbid, a Protestant? For a start, they'd certainly be tortured, although the Inquisition actually did this less than secular authorities. This would go on until you confessed or until an inquisitor decided on whether or not you were guilty. Foreign traders who were Protestants were often tortured before being fined and then expelled from Spain. These people then wrote of their ordeals, which were widely disseminated across the Protestant world, hence the Inquisition's reputation. For those who were guilty, didn't repent, or couldn't pay their way out, the punishment was often death via burning. You should be aware though that there weren't many of these, and only about 2% of all trials ended with an execution. So, to conclude, by modern standards, the Spanish Inquisition was pretty brutal. It was driven by a near-rabid hatred of other religions, it was corrupt in its demands for bribes, and it was responsible for widespread torture and executions. By medieval standards, they were often much better than the alternative. They required evidence for trials, they were skeptical of any accusations, and their torture was often less severe. And the Spanish Inquisition was one of the first institutions to dismiss confessions obtained via torture. So whilst they were bad, for the time, they weren't that bad. Compared to other Inquisitions, especially the Roman Inquisition, they were quite lenient. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, with a special thanks to my Patreon supporters: James Bizanet, Colin Castleman, Danny Maloney, Marvin Cassow, Rob Waterhouse, John B. Gaze, Mo, Aaron the White, Michael Reynolds, James Castaneda, Gustav Swan, Marcus Arsner, Jordan Longley, James Castaneda, Gustav Swan, Marcus Arsner, Jordan Longley, Gareth Turner, Mr. Show, Rashid Ali, Spinning Three Plates, Phil de Oink Oink, David Silverman, Izzy, Winston Kaywood, Maggie Paxkowski, Lexi Schwinn, Spencer Lightfoot, Kelly Moneymaker, Robert Wetzel, Sky Chappelle and Anthony Beckett.